Good afternoon. Welcome to Remaking the Economy, How to Design Democratic Management. I'm Steve Dubb, Senior Editor of Economic Justice here at Nonprofit Quarterly, coming to you from Boston on land historically stewarded by the Massachusetts Nation. In this webinar, we look at how organizations can design more democratic workplaces. One model often overlooked, the worker-owned cooperative has had to deal with questions of participation, management, and governance of democratic organizations for decades. A year ago, Rebecca Bowen from the Democracy at Work Institute, also known as DOWI, wrote about this topic for Nonprofit Quarterly. To explore these questions further, MPQ has partnered with Rebecca and DOWI to bring you today's panelists, who are Nicole Cook, is owner and co-founder of Technicians for Sustainability, a solar installation cooperative based in Tucson, Arizona that converted to employee ownership in 2017. Jarisa Soriano is Training and Education Manager at the Democracy at Work Institute and has worked in the past as a trainer and has assisted in curriculum development for Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx, the nation's largest worker cooperative. Andrea Talley is General Manager of Mandela Grocery Co-op. It's a Black-owned worker cooperative grocery store in Oakland, California. A few notes. First, we're very excited to take your questions, and we'll leave considerable time at the end for them. We start with a few of our own, and then we'll get to yours. Please enter your questions into the question box at the bottom of the screen, and I will share as many of them with the panelists as I can. Second, a regular question is, will you get the slides and recording after the webinar? And the answer is yes. So no need to worry in that regard. I also encourage you to join the conversation via social media. We have the hashtag rebuild the economy. One last thing before going to our panel, I would like to acknowledge the support of Union Bank. As a partner to nonprofit organizations in our communities, Union Bank, the community bank of the nation's capital, is a proud sponsor of this economic forum. You can visit a veg today or go to www.bankwithunited.com to learn more. Thanks for joining us. And also, please complete the brief survey. It's only 5 questions after the webinar to inform our work. And with that, let's begin. And Anj, I'll begin with you. Could you introduce yourself and Mandela Grocery Co-op and talk a little bit about your position as a general manager, which I think was created when you came into that cooperative?
Absolutely. Hello from Oakland, California. Thanks for having me on today. I'm so happy to be here. As Steve said, my name's Andrea Talley. I go by Anj, and I am a worker owner and also general manager of Mandela Grocery Cooperative, which is located in West Oakland. And we are a small grocery store, small but mighty, just under 2,500 square feet. And we have thousands of high quality grocery products in our store. We support local farmers by buying their pesticide-free organic produce. We intentionally support Black and Brown farmers in order to keep money circulating in our Black and Brown communities. And Mandela is a team of 8 worker owners right now. And when I was hired on back in 2017, there wasn't previously a general manager position. And so the 4 members at that time voted to change that. They voted to have someone come on who could kind of be in a position of an accountability coach and someone to really help, develop systems and ways to kind of frame our leadership decisions and how those get made in the co-op. And so I was so fortunate to be able to step into that position. And it's been the joy of my life, really, to be working at Mandela. I love it very much. And I feel very fortunate to be working with such a special group of folks.
Thanks. Nicole, could you introduce yourself and talk about Technicians for Sustainability and maybe talk a little bit about its conversion to work ownership and how that happened?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. So I'm Nicole with Technicians for Sustainability, TFS, as we call ourselves. We're located in Tucson, Arizona, as Steve mentioned, and we were founded in 2003 in a shed, actually, in a backyard, with a mission to transition our local community to clean energy. We, in that aim, we design and install solar energy systems for homes, businesses, schools, and a lot of nonprofits as well. During that time, we've really had three primary aims, right? The first one was obvious: to spread solar, also to create great jobs, and then to care for the environment and our community through our operations as a company. So for years, we were successfully doing just that, but we wanted more. We also wanted to explore how we could create a more just and resilient economy. We felt that people should be able to participate more fully in the fruits of their own labor. And we also wanted people to be able to have the dignity to participate in the decision-making and also the responsibility that goes along with that. So in 2017, we still had our first ever employee was still working with us all those years later. And together we transitioned to the employee ownership model using a worker cooperative structure. So today we have 23 co-owners. We have 5 candidates in the training process, and we're a team overall of about 65 staff. We, in our operations, we use a governance and management approach. So we delineate the big governance decisions, which are typically done by the owners or with the owner hat on. We delineate those from the everyday, the day-to-day operational decisions that get done really with our employee hats on. So because our organizational chart is not a traditional top-down pyramid chart, but rather it's more of a bi-directional circular chart where influence and accountability both flow both directions, we really have that participation built into the structure of our organization. So it's really a work in progress, right? It's given us a chance to implement democratic or participatory management, but we work on it every day, how to spread that throughout the governance of the company. And I hope to have the opportunity to share a little bit more of that part of our story with all of you today.
Great, thanks. Jarisa, could you introduce yourself and talk about some of your prior work involving training and curriculum development at the nation's largest worker co-op?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jarisa Soriano, and I am the Education and Training Manager at Democracy at Work Institute. We work to expand the worker cooperative model to meet the needs of workers locked out of good jobs and ownership opportunities, especially BIPOC and recent immigrant and low-wage workers. I have been at Dowie for 4 months, and prior to Dowie, I was the curriculum manager at PHI. At PHI, aside from developing curriculum, I also facilitated their signature coaching approach to supervision training, which is a relational approach to supervision that focused on effective communication and holding workers accountable in a respectful way. I am really excited to be here, and thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to go to Anj, and this is about designing democratic workplaces. What design decisions need to be made to support a democratic workplace? And I think you had some kind of a chart you wanted to show on that, but you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, so I really love this question. What design decisions need to be made to support a democratic management? And of course, the answer is very broad. It depends, of course, on your organization, your industry. Similar to Technicians for Sustainability, what Nicole said, well, I'll back up and say Mandela Grocery is a great example of how decision-making happens because we're a grocery store. So it's easy for people to kind of imagine some of the decisions that need to get made on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. But so I will in a minute share our decision-making chart so people can see. But when you're thinking about business, how do you want to share, basically design decisions, how do you want to share power and information, right? And so at Mandela, Before I really came on as the general manager, that information was a lot of information was kind of going into a void. The person, the accountant who was not a part of the membership would make decisions around what bills get paid and when, and a lot of times that information wasn't necessarily shared with the membership, which presented a lot of issues in our history. Mandela has been there for 12 years, and we've had a little bit of a roller coaster ride there from the very beginning. And so, when I came in, I really decided, let's get in here and really organize some of these decisions. And actually, I participated in the program that Democracy at Work Institute put together a couple of years ago in 2019, I believe, the participatory management course. Nicole and I were in it together, and this was an exercise that the team did there, that the group did, where we created a decision-making chart. So let me just share what came out of that. I share my screen here so you can see. This is Mandela Grocery Cooperative's decision-making chart. And some of the decisions that get made on a daily basis, if we start by looking at the bottom of the chart, in departments and teams, the department work, buying and sourcing, the way that we have designed sharing decisions as a team is that each member buys for their own individual department. So for example, we have one member who's the lead produce department buyer, another member who's the lead grocery department buyer, another member who's the lead dairy and meat department buyer. And so decisions around which farmer to source from, negotiating prices with a farmer, potentially buying maybe kale from one farmer this season and a different farmer the next season, sourcing through a distributor. Those are the kinds of decisions that happen every single day. And the members are fully empowered to make those decisions on their own. And our culture is, if you want to think things through with someone, talk it through, everyone's open, but we know who's the decision maker in that kind of scenario. And so, a lot of those kinds of decisions that happen daily on the floor, whether that's pricing, same thing. We have a collective agreement around our margin. We don't want to make our prices so scary that the neighbors are, long-term residents of West Oakland don't want to shop there, and support the co-op because, we do sell high quality groceries. The price point is a little bit higher. So we've collectively agreed not to go above a certain point, but there's wiggle room in the each buyer in the department gets to make the decision of how to price their items. But moving up to different types of decisions is the next level, which is committees. So we've delegated a lot of the administrative work into committees. And so that was kind of what's, similar to what it sounded like, was a little bit similar to what Nicole was saying earlier, is how we have on our employee hats every day. And then once a week, we kind of put on a little bit more of almost like a manager hat, I would say. And when you're thinking about administrative work, so whether that's the HR committee, and we're thinking through a grievance that someone has, or hiring decisions, or if it's the maintenance committee and there's a refrigerator that needs a new compressor, and it costs thousands of dollars. I mean, these committees are empowered to make decisions. And the rest of the membership knows and trusts, okay, these committees have talked it through and decided, landed in the place that they thought was best for the business. And we also obviously have our finance and data committee, which is a big one. There's a lot of administrative work that goes into that committee, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And we also have management. We've designed our management to kind of be a function. I was hired on as the manager, and a good example of that is kind of how this chart got made. As I mentioned, I went to the participatory management course with the Democracy at Work Institute, and I kind of created the first draft of this decision-making chart and then brought it to the rest of the team. And we all looked through it, pulled it apart, and kind of were able to use the initial framework to land in a place where everyone agreed. And I think that's a really good example of management. So it's not that I created this chart and then said, this is what we're going to do, right? It's like I kind of created the first draft, and then we all collectively agreed and made it into something that works for everyone. And so management at the co-op is a function more so than a person. And so, we have less often, we have meetings that talk about employee compensation, raising capital, if we need to raise capital to buy a piece of equipment or something like that. Technology, these are things that we talk about less often, but they do come up. And so we'll have a management meeting. It's a different type of meeting. And then lastly is our board and shareholder level of decision making. And we hold these meetings one time a year. We have our shareholder meeting. All of the members are shareholders. And we talk about changing, if there are any changes to our bylaws that need to happen. If we were to want to dissolve the company, it would happen at a board meeting. If we wanted to move, like buy a building and move to a different location, it would happen at a board meeting. So I love the way that this decision-making chart has kind of created times, right? Whether it's daily, monthly, annually, for us to have conversations to think about different aspects of the business.
Great, thanks, Anj. Nicole, I was wondering if you might jump in just briefly on this, because it seems to me there's one key difference between like a solar installation co-op and a grocery co-op. Grocery co-op's at a specific site, whereas in solar installation, I assume you go to multiple sites all over the place. So how does that work?
It's true, there's some logistical differences, but a lot of what Anj said really resonates with the way we've modeled it. And a few things I think that I'll point to that she pointed out. One is that decision-making processes have to be well-defined, and Anj has this great visual. Ours is not quite as attractive, but I think functionally it does the job. But I think defining the categories of decisions that get made is essential, what types of decisions, and then who, as a person or people or groups or teams, who makes those decisions. Really similar to Anj, we still have and rely a lot on role-based expertise and authority, right? So we have a distributed model. We have people working all over town, sometimes all over the state. And those folks need to have the trust and the respect of their coworkers and of the whole organization to trust that they have the knowledge, the expertise, and the authority and the responsibility to make good decisions in the moment. Similarly, as Mandela, those are the sort of what they're empowered to do. The result is usually that there's a lot of consulting that happens anyway. Folks like to hear, they like to get good input from their colleagues. So there's a lot of consulting that happens. And we work to try and be clear when we're consulting, but we have the decision-making responsibility, and when we're consulting because we actually need to come to some sort of vote or consensus as a group. So we talk about those things. We talk about types of decisions a lot throughout our work.
Great. Jarisa, I wanted to throw this to you. And, what do you see as some of the core principles that define democratic management, and how does a worker co-op balance the worker ownership with empowering managers to manage?
Thank you, Steve. Well, first of all, I want to say that I heard a theme come up, and Nicole both mentioned the importance of trust in the decision-making process. And, at the School of Democratic Management, we have tools where we talk about trust, and that it takes time, right? Like it takes time to build trust, and it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, but it definitely is key in regards to creating a democratic workplace. And then in regards to the core principles, well, at Dowie, we believe that democratic managers need to know and do all the things that any conventional business manager needs to do, right? Like to ensure that the business is doing well, and that the business is successful, and that it moves people and resources towards their goals. And what I believe sets a democratic manager apart And the core principles that really makes them different than your traditional, management is commitment. And I would say commitment to sharing information transparently, sharing power regularly, and teaching others to do what they need to do in order to really participate fully in the operations and the governance of the business. So, democratic managers are developing workers' capacity through training and what I like to call like this kind of human-centered supervision, right? Looking at our workers as a whole. And, when Peggy Powell and Rick Serpent founded CHCA in 1985, I believe that they were always intentional about empowering the workers. And, when managers share power and when they teach others, right? I think that's so key. When they share power and teach others and then invite them in to participate in operations and governance, what I observed at CHCA is that trickles down. It trickles down to the work and how they do their job. So for example, at CHCA, the direct care workers, they were confident in their skill set. And they knew that the information and the experiences that they had were valuable, right? And important. And they were comfortable voicing that. They were comfortable voicing that. And that is unique. For those of you who are not in the healthcare industry, it's unique because direct care workers oftentimes are not seen in most agencies, and they're not heard. And if you are a caregiver, you know that being a direct care worker, it's hard work, physically and emotionally. They're going into a stranger's home, oftentimes bathing, cleaning, and feeding the clients, and managing the complexities of family dynamics, mental health, among many other things. And, they are essential workers, and yet, unfortunately not seen. And even during the pandemic, we rarely, heard about them. So, what I'm trying to say is that giving them a voice and, these opportunities to share their knowledge and having managers equipped to build on that, on, what they already have, and to improve not only their jobs, but the quality of the care that they provide is critical. And I believe that's one of the key reasons why, a business like CHCA has been able to sustain a democratic workplace for the past, 37 years.
That's quite impressive. Thanks. Nicole, I think I'm going to throw this to you. So we've talked already a little bit about the importance of information. I mean, if you distribute decision-making, then people need information in order to make those decisions. Talk about the systems that you use at Technicians for Sustainability to share information with workers. And I know you use some parts of open book management. So what does that involve?
I'll just pause and sort of elevate again what both Jarisa and Anj said, and just underscore that for TFS, we feel the same way, that this is really about sharing power and money. And that in order to share that power, the information piece has to be there so that people know how to get involved and what the levers are that make change, right? So for us, that access to information is essential. We talk a lot about rights and responsibilities. Steve, you just said this. If people have a responsibility to make informed decisions, they need that good info, and they have that corresponding right to adequate information to support it. So how we do that, we do it in a few ways. We do use open book management. It's really our own flavor, our own in-house style of that. We have a version for all employees that happens on a weekly basis through our emailed newsletter. We have some critical numbers we look at each week and keep an eye on. And those are meant to be sort of a quick check-in for people, no matter where they are in the company, what their role is, no matter if they started Monday, like one of my new staff members, or if they've been with us for 16 years, they can get a sense of where the company is and how they're doing each week. Then we do a deeper dive version for owners once a month, which is looking at the financials There's a lot of education that happens in that. Even a couple of years in, for some folks into their ownership process, people are still learning and wrapping their heads around all the different aspects of our very complicated profit and loss and balance sheet. So we also work to build an understanding of strategic decisions as they're made. So if they're made at the ownership level, those go out as cascading messages to all employees so that they can inquire about it, so they can learn about it, so they can sort of see behind the curtain to how decisions are getting made, what the rationale is for decisions, so that we can bring everyone along in that process of sort of learning the business of doing our business.
Great. So Anja, I thought I'd ask you about leadership development, and how does democratic management feed into developing leaders, and does democratic management change the way that people are compensated?
Yeah, thank you. So before I answer that question, Steve, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Jarisa was saying about the worker. I was really touched about how you're talking about, the caregiver and how they're often not seen, and how, in this democratic model, their voices are heard, and how I just want to echo that for across so many industries, definitely true in the food industry. I think, historically, the food industry, from the farmer to the grocery store, the worker, the actual person, picking the berries and putting them into baskets and loading them onto the truck, and driving them to the warehouse. I mean, these people are so often not seen, not really heard by the consumer. And so I think that that's why I love working at a worker co-op, because we really are changing the economy. We're showing there's another way that business can be done. So I was really touched by that. But when thinking about information sharing, let me see, I want to circle back to Steve's question. How does democratic management affect leadership development and careers? In a few ways. I mean, because democratic management is about sharing knowledge, sharing power, definitely sharing information, I think it kind of builds in that you're building up your team, you're empowering your team by sharing so much information. And so what we do at Mandela is we do monthly workshops where we collectively at the beginning of the year decide what are areas in the business that people want to dive deeply into. Finances is always built into that because it's just this ongoing, very complicated thing. But where are some other areas? And recently we started doing self-care, which is like so sweet. So we like get together and do yoga in the park. It's just like, because that's important. We're humans, we're not machines. But we do workshops on how to better use your Google Drive, your Gmail. How do we use Slack? How are we, just times for us to really make sure that we're empowering people to use the tools that are at our fingertips effectively. And it does help, with our communication. Communication is huge for us. And I think for any business, but definitely any worker co-op, we are constantly communicating, whether that's in Slack. We're small groups, so we text each other constantly via email, and then also the way that we organize information too, it's important that everyone knows where to find what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge, huge key because it's oftentimes these little moments when there's 10 things going on and you need to find this one invoice from like 6 months ago. And it's like, you have to be able to kind of know, okay, where can I look to find this information or find this person's phone number or whatever. So we have to be very organized. And so that's been a big key in my position as manager is to kind of help create those systems of organization and then communicate so everybody knows where things are. So that's really key. And then let's see, how does it affect compensation levels? This is a really good question. I don't know that I have the great answer, because this is a conversation that we're currently having as a team is, how do we make compensation feel fair to everyone? Because the thing that happens with co-ops that I've found is sometimes there's this like, everyone's got it, so no one really has it. Do you know what I mean? Like there are these tasks that need to happen, and since everyone's got it, like no one's really stepping in to just really lead that. And so I've heard from my team members that it can feel like there are the same few people that are doing most the work. It doesn't feel quite fair. It feels like lopsided. And so right now we're floating around this conversation of like, maybe we can attach compensation to the number of decisions that an individual has to make on that chart. But it's just an idea. Right now, it's a pretty flat structure where me as the manager, I'm making slightly more than the members, but all of the other members are on the same pay grade, and then our candidates are all on the same pay grade. And but like I said, we're rethinking that because we're kind of trying to see if maybe another way of organizing could be for the people working in the store the most to make the most money, and the people working in the admin side making, maybe slightly less, because of our business model. The people who are interacting with the customers the most should probably be making more. So anyway, so we're in the middle of it right now. I don't have a good answer.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Anj. Jarisa, I was hoping you could talk a little bit more, elaborate on this coaching supervision model that you spent a lot of time working on, and how does it differ from traditional supervision? And I don't know, is there any untraining you have to do as well as training?
Yeah, thank you. Well, this is a perfect segue because Anj, you were just talking about the importance of communication and day-to-day communication. And I just want to add that at Adawi, we also have a system. We use a Google Docs system that creates a really easy way to plug in the links and find files. And those, things are critical, right? Because it creates transparency and trust as well. And then when we talk about communication on the day-to-day, there's the importance of having just really good, effective communication. And that's why the core curriculum of the coaching approach to supervision is so critical, because oftentimes what we find is that managers and supervisors, they're in their role because they're really good at what they do. They have years of experience, but often that doesn't mean that they have the skills and tools to supervise, effectively. Right. And that takes time and it takes practice. So the coaching approach, which is a curriculum developed by PHI, is a relational approach to communication. And it's critical for all, managers to be trained in some type of effective communication and emotional intelligence training, because it's so key when empowering others. At CHCA and its sister organization ICS, which I worked at for several years, they invested in the coaching approach. It was a part of their onboarding. I facilitated the coaching approach and ensured that, at ICS, all of the new employees were trained, as well as managers and leaders, because it was shown to be so effective, and we would see a change, right away. Also at PHI, the WIT team, which I was a part of, working with Maria Elena de Valle and Kathleen, and as well as Peggy, we were really intentional, as well as incorporating these principles in the curriculum that we would develop for the direct care workers, right? So it's not like you do a one-time training, it used to be a 2-day training. It's not like you do a 2-day training and you're set. you have to be intentional about really incorporating these concepts of effective communication, of active listening in the day-to-day. I love something that, my former colleague, Maria Elena del Valle used to say. She says, the coaching approach is not just like a skill set, it's a way of being and a mindset. And that's what I think about when I think of democratic management as well. Like, yes, it's a set of systems and a way to structure your business, but there's a value to it as well, right? Like the importance of hearing your colleagues out, your workers out, as well as empowering them by giving them a voice. How important is that?
Thanks, Jarisa. That's great. Nicole, I wanted to ask you a question and go to the audience questions, but, I wanted to, how do you balance the tension? You're operating in a market, right? So how do you balance the tensions between the demands of, we'll call it business in quotes, and with democratic management? And, I assume it's not always an easy balance.
Agreed. I'm sitting here actually still thinking about what Jarisa just said, because it was so beautiful. And I think that, right, that concept of taking it beyond that structure to the sort of lifestyle is really resonating with me. And I'll bring that actually into this piece of how you balance those tensions, right, between this market demand. We operate in a very competitive sector where it's quite unusual for democratic management to happen in the other solar companies that we are going up against and bidding against, right? So throughout the organization at TFS, we are all clear that to reach the success that we want, that we have to be efficient. There's just no way about it. We're looking at lean operations and efficiency every day, every week. But we're also clear that that doesn't mean giving up on the process or the quality that we want in our process or our product. So we try and find a balance, right? With a lot of things, there's a tension there. We rely mostly on things we've already discussed today. We get really clear on rights and responsibilities for every role throughout the company. We get really clear on what the scope of decision-making power is. We use our decision matrix. And since we have those decisions as categories of decisions defined ahead of time, we can remind ourselves, because that's what has to happen a lot, right? Folks might want to start to get involved in a decision that needs to be made quickly and efficiently. They may choose to consult, or they may have to remind one another who ultimately has accountability or the rights to make those decisions. Sometimes those don't work out well, right? And we may revisit individual decisions, but we're more likely to revisit our categories. Do we need to rethink what types of decisions get made where, right? And that's when we can go back to that governance level and look at that matrix and make sure that things get adjusted as we go and as we learn. But I think that having that process in place really helps us to not get bogged down on individual operational decisions as we go along and do our business. And I'll just say it as an interesting note that the same is true for the governance level, right? At the governance level, you get, a couple dozen solar installers in a room together, and it can be really easy to want to talk about the nuts and bolts, right? And to have to sort of pull out of the weeds to the really big picture, especially where some of those folks, it's new for them to be thinking really big and really strategically. They're really good at it, right? But we all have to sort of pause and be intentional and remind ourselves of which hat we're wearing in any given day. So thanks for the question, Steve.
Great. Wanted to go to this audience question. I thought it was a really good one. So the questioner asks, sometimes it can be hard to imagine these models in real life, if you're not in a worker cooperative. Could you share an example of a conflict or disagreement regarding decision-making and how it was resolved? So anybody can jump in on that.
I'm just going to jump in and say we're in our 6th year of operating as a worker co-op, and I have a shortage of examples to give you. We don't often have conflict around I mean, conflict in the way that I think the asker is asking, we always look for conflict, right? In fact, if there aren't enough solutions being proposed, there's one solution and everybody's ready to vote on it, we will intentionally pause ourselves and say, what are we missing, right? What is it that we're not considering? I think that sometimes people want more time than other folks feel like we have. And that may be a place in which we come into some conflict. And we've gone both directions with it. Sometimes we say, can we proceed with this decision and revisit it in X amount of time? And sometimes we say, what is the cost of putting this decision aside for another month? And so I think that's the closest thing we've had to a conflict about a particular decision.
Jarisa, Anj, anything you want to add? Okay.
There are, Steve, I would just add, conflicts happen almost regularly, honestly. And it's not that they're bad. It's a great moment to really think about, like Nicole is saying, which direction do we want to go and why? Like, how are we connecting this back up to our overall mission? There's a lot of binary like friction that happens within decisions that need to get made at the store. So I'm just thinking about something simple like pricing, of an item. Produce, for example, we price a little lower because everyone should have access to high quality organic produce. But in organic specialty cheese, not so much. You don't necessarily need this special type of Gouda, whatever, truffle butter, whatever, you know what I mean? So it's like sometimes people are, maybe someone might want to price things lower and then, one buyer, because we do operate in teams and one buyer wants to price things higher. I mean, these conflicts happen a lot. And so we kind of have to remind ourselves, well, we're weighing between making our profit margin at the end of the year and really thinking about our customer base, who's actually buying this item. So it presents, these types of conflicts present opportunities for you to kind of think about your business in a bigger way.
Great, thanks. This question, I think I'm going to direct it to Nicole first, and then you guys others can jump on. But so the questioner says, we're at a nonprofit that is considering becoming employee-owned or having some model of democratic workplace. And so I'm thinking, Nicole, you guys weren't a nonprofit, you were a for-profit, but you were structured as a traditional business and made that conversion. What were the decision-making factors? How do you go about, like, if they actually wanted to do this at this nonprofit, make this conversion, what are some of the steps they should be thinking about?
Well, it's a big question, and I'll just put the disclaimer out there that we sort of did things backwards. So when we had this idea, and we actually had no idea there was an entire industry of support around this, like Dowie, for example. We've since connected with the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops and Dowie and some other incredible support organizations. So my biggest recommendation would be to source those folks first, because they have a lot of great information and tools to share. We did not go that direction because we didn't know those things existed until later. But I think that probably the basics start with, what is your motivation? Who's looking to get what out of it? And is that the right form? And so I think that form should follow function. And I think you have to get clear on what your aims are to figure out what the right format is for you. The other thing I would say is that my experience working in the conversion and throughout is that it's not, it's not a magic fairy dust. Like, it doesn't change anything overnight. And not that we had anything we necessarily wanted to change. We had an organizational culture that we really loved. But the piece that I'll point out is that most of us don't have experience day to day or week to week or even month to month with real democracy, right? Unless we're really lucky to be engaged in communities where there's a lot of participatory democracy. And so those are muscles that everyone has to build, right? And the folks that have had more power have to learn how to power down or step back or make space. And the folks who suddenly have a vote or a voice, maybe more formally than they had previously, have to get comfortable with that and need tools and education around that. Some of them don't, right? We'll step in really comfortably right away, and other folks need some space to figure that out. And the best advice we got was to be patient with each other and with ourselves, and to go slowly and to support ourselves. And so that would be my recommendation.
Thanks. So I think there's a bunch of questions for Anj, so I'm going to try to combine a couple or maybe three of them. So there was a question like, how many people work there? How do you deal with thin margins in the grocery business? But also a question about committee work and, is it paid? And I would add how much time do folks spend on committee work compared to other work that they do at the grocery store?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. There are 8 people that work at Mandela currently, and we have, 8 members and 2 candidates. So there's 10 of us total. And we also have 1 part-time assistant who kind of does help with the administrative, organizational, just paper kind of work. But our committees, we meet once a month. So committee meetings are 1 hour and they are once a month. And in addition to committee meetings, we have general meetings, which is where all the committees report to the entire group. And so those are 2-hour meetings that also happen once a month. So there are 3 hours a month worth of committee meetings that are happening. And yes, that time is paid. And then also there's an expectation that you're doing committee work. Maybe you're taking it home because we're business owners and we have to take work home sometimes, and this is kind of where at the end of the year, when there's a surplus, that we can compensate ourselves via patronage for some of that workload that maybe we weren't paid for hourly throughout the year. Yeah.
Great. So there are a couple questions on consensus, and I should say off the top, I don't know that you guys operate by consensus or majority rule, but how do you, either way, what are sort of the decision-making rules, and whether it's consensus or majority or supermajority, how do you work with member owners who might disagree with a decision?
Mm-hmm. And this is to Mandela, yeah?
To everyone.
Oh, to everyone? Okay. All right. Yeah. So I'm happy to start just by saying, in our bylaws, we have 1 vote that is required to be unanimous. And that is the vote to hire, whether or not we're hiring a new member into the group. That needs to be a unanimous decision. Everything else is consensus, which to us is 75%, 3 out of 4. Generally the way we approach votes is everyone be in agreement. So we're having a full discussion where you're fleshing out every part, every side as much as possible of this decision that needs to be made. And the goal is for everyone to be in agreement. So very rarely is there major conflict happening in those conversations, because it's really more of a discovery type of conversation. Are we thinking about all sides of this? And if there are questions, sometimes we do have to pause it and bring it back the next month at the next meeting, where people have done the expectation is that there's research that was done, there are answers to the questions that you're coming with. But then when we take a vote, you kind of have a sense of, before we even vote, how this is going to go, right? Because of the types of questions that everyone had the opportunity to ask. But it is important, similar to kind of what Nicole was mentioning, when we're having a consensus or a vote conversation, we make space for every single voice to be heard. So even if this is someone who maybe usually is more quiet or less vocal or whatever, the expectation is still that you say something, you ask something, because that is how we kind of define participating. Everyone has to participate in these decision-making conversations. And so say something, and then when it comes time for us to vote, everybody either gives a thumbs up or thumbs down, and we do majority, 75%. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to jump in on that one, or if not, I'll go to the next question. I'll go to the next question. Jarisa, there was a question for you on if you could give some more examples of what coaching supervision looks like.
Yeah, thank you. So coaching supervision, typically it's a 2-day training where not only do we go over the skills of active listening, which entails, really being present, pulling back from judgments and assumptions, asking open questions to be curious and learn more about what's going on in a challenging situation. We also cover self-awareness and self-management. And we also cover giving and receiving effective feedback, which is really critical in regards to having difficult conversations and holding workers accountable, but like in a respectful way. So we go over the skills, and then it's really interactive. It typically involves role playing, case scenarios, a lot of discussion, and it works. And that's why at DAWI, we've incorporated some of these concepts and some of the skills into our School of Democratic Management Guide. You'll see that we have a page on some of the effective communication skills.
Great, thanks. And I think there's a link to that report in the article that was posted earlier. So just in case anyone's looking for that. Nicole, there's a question for you about sort of that there's this you mentioned that there's like some folks who are young members in their 20s and others who are veterans in their 50s or 60s. Does that affect the functioning of the co-op in any way, or is that, do you have to do anything different in terms of decision-making process, or is it work across the board?
I should clarify that sometimes when I refer to our oldest employee, I'm rarely referring to their age, or if I talk about the youngest, okay. I'm really talking about their tenure with us, although it is true, we have quite a large age spread as well. But when I talk about that, I'm usually talking about their tenure. I think I mentioned that our first non-owner employee that was hired still works with us today and is an owner. And so he gets the title of oldest, whether he likes it or not. But I think that obviously there is and would be some power dynamic that comes from having tenure, right? We have been really lucky that early on we recognized, actually partially because of this particular staff member, that we wanted to be able to have responsibility and growth, not just mean up and out of the field, which is really typical in our industry, right? So we found ways for people to take on more responsibility and increase their skills without having to move out of the field, because a lot of the folks that work in the field with us, they really like that hands-on work. And so we've done a good job of inverting, right? It's not like, oh, the office people are the important ones that get higher pay. And so actually in our organization, we typically pay higher than our industry standards for our field positions and lower for office-based leadership or sales positions. And so some of that trickles through onto the democratic governance level and the ownership level as well. We work really hard to find ways to get new owners involved and to hear their voices. And then the other thing I'll say is we've had to figure out a little bit, Anj talked about this, like what does participation look like? We certainly have participation is one of our responsibilities, but we've had to grow and learn. And this is somewhat about age, this is somewhat cultural, this is somewhat about like family or community of origin, that the different people have different ways that they can communicate, not to mention different they're coming in with different comfort levels with English. So we've had to figure out ways to do more written communication ahead of time. Zoom and COVID has been great because it's given us the capacity to have some meetings online, and we find that changes the way that some people can engage. So probably even more than actual age, when we look at issues around tenure and comfort with having power in the organization, we just look to continually be sort of listening to each other and diversifying how people can participate. Yeah.
Great, thanks. There are a couple questions. I don't know who wants to take this on, but I'll just call them personnel issues. So there's a question about termination. How do you terminate somebody in a worker cooperative? There's a question about confidentiality versus transparency. So anything you want to say about how you manage difficult personnel issues?
I can start us off. At Mandela, we have, like I mentioned, an HR committee, our human resources committee, and generally thinking about how do you terminate someone. Obviously, nobody wants that to be the scenario, but we do have a written grievance process in place. So if there is something egregious that happens, maybe, and it goes both ways. Like if the employee has a grievance with somebody else on the team, or if someone on the team has a grievance with another team member, you write the process down, and it just kind of becomes this written record. So over time, if this instance keeps occurring, then what the HR committee does is we step outside of the store. Maybe we go to lunch and we talk about these kind of open it up and have a very open and humble conversation. This is what's happening. This is what's on record. We can't continue to have these types of grievances for X, Y, and Z reasons. This is how it's affecting the business, the team, the morale. Being a member is open and voluntary, and we just want our business to succeed. And so generally when you're talking about grievances and you're connecting it back to the business that each one of us really loves and is working incredibly hard to work, if it's not a good fit, then it's not it kind of comes up naturally. If someone maybe is having, personal stuff going on with their family or whatever, I mean, these types of things do happen. And if it's timing is not right and it's not a good fit, then we just make it really easy. Like, let's just go separate ways. And when timing it gets better for you, we can come back and just try and keep it very like community and, kind of feel. So, but yeah, that kind of stuff does come up.
Thanks. Let's see, we're getting close to the hour. Maybe I can fit in at least one more question. There are a couple of questions about informal power. So there's, one of the questions is, how do you keep the balance of power when there are dominant personalities in a group? Or how many decisions are made in formal means versus informal means? So, clearly, power can operate in different ways within organizations. How do you manage that?
Jarisa, do you want to take that with your relational approach and talk about some of those power dynamics?
Yeah, I think one is being aware of the power dynamics. And I think second is also being very clear. I think we mentioned this earlier in regards to the decision-making process and who does what within the business. I think will support these type, kind of support, lessen these type of situations where you have one person who kind of rises up because other people, are not clear on who's doing what, or, kind of roles and responsibilities. And then I would say that we have to be intentional, especially we're working with employees who may or may not be used to having a voice, or who may not feel comfortable having a voice for whatever reason. We have to be intentional in regards to inviting them to be a part of the discussion, inviting them to be a part of the decision-making process. It's all very intentional. And I think that it's a process and it takes time. It takes time to build trust. It takes time to build confidence in our workers.
Okay, I'll do one last question. This is kind of an interesting, provocative question, so I'll just throw it out there and see if anyone wants to respond. Why even have managers and non-managers? So we're talking about democratic management. Obviously, that implies some value to management.
I'll take this one briefly, and then Andrea, Jarisa, feel free to jump in. And I'll just say we're asking that question right now. We traditionally have very, very, very little management. And believe it or not, the ask has been coming from throughout the company. Folks want more management. So we're looking at breaking our organization or our teams into 3 different management level positions. We have traditionally kept management low for a few reasons. 1, because we tend to be high trust and pretty highly functional. 2, because we like to do everything lean, and it always just seems like a huge waste of time and resources, right? And we would rather have it be distributed. We still are on that end of the spectrum, but I'll just say that at 65, and growing, we do see the value in having a point person. Sometimes that's actually for newer folks that are coming into the organization. It feels really disorienting if you haven't worked in an organization as flat as ours to not understand like who your go-to person is. And so I've already have a note to reach out to Jarisa to hear more about this relational approach to coaching. But as we start to build in management, those are some of the reasons we're looking for it.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and I would just add really quickly, accountability is so critical. Doing what you say you're going to do, it can be hard when you're doing 10 million things at the same time. And so just having someone to check in and say, hey, like, are you still going to get to this really important thing that the business is counting on you for? Do you need help? Having someone who's just kind of coordinating and watching and, and able to support we found it to be very helpful.
Great. Well, with that, I think we got to as many questions as we could. Thanks to all the participants on this webinar for your excellent questions. And I want to also thank, of course, our panelists, Anj Tali with Mandela Grocery Co-op, Jarisa Soriano with the Democracy at Work Institute, and Nicole Cook with Technicians for Sustainability. Also, I'll mention in 3 weeks' time, it's in the chat, MPQ's next Remaking the Economy webinar will be a joint 90-minute webinar with Shelter Force called Closing the Racial Wealth Gap, and we'll have Gary Cunningham, Jeremy Greer, John Powell, and Ann Price, so I hope you join us for that. And so thanks to all of you, and thanks especially to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.